I wasn't sure what was worse, the words they said or the fact that I had finally realized they were right. You're too old to take care of yourself. Those words echoed in my mind as I packed my things. And in that moment, I made a choice that would change everything. I left. Without a word to anyone, I just left. My name is Helen, and I'm in my early 60s. I've always prided myself on being independent. Raised in the small town of Jackson, Mississippi, I learned early on how to take care of myself. My childhood wasn't filled with luxury, but it was filled with love. I married young to a wonderful man, Jack. We built a life together, raised 2 children, Emma and Jake, and I felt like we were happy. But as the years went by, I felt the weight of change in the air. Over the years, the world changed, and so did my family. Jack passed away a few years ago, leaving me alone in the house that we had once shared. And while I thought I could handle the solitude, the world around me began to shift in ways I never expected. It wasn't the house, the old furniture, or even the quiet that bothered me. It was how my children looked at me now. Emma, my daughter, had always been the one who took charge. She became the responsible one, always looking out for everyone, always trying to control everything. Jake, on the other hand, was quieter, more distant. But both of them, over the years, started to treat me differently. It started with small things. At first, I noticed that they no longer asked me for advice like they used to. It was as if they didn't trust my judgment anymore. But the real change came when Emma and Jake sat me down one evening in my living room. I remember it clearly, the tension in the room, the way Emma kept looking at Jake before she spoke. They told me that it was time for me to move into an assisted living facility. They said I wasn't able to take care of myself anymore, that I was a burden. I tried to protest, of course. I told them I was perfectly capable of managing my own life, but their faces told a different story. Emma's voice grew more insistent. Jake remained silent, but his eyes were cold. "Mom, you're just too old for all this," Emma said, her voice breaking as if it hurt her to say it. "We're doing this for your own good. You can't live alone anymore." Those words, they stung. They felt like a slap across the face. And I realized something in that moment. They had already made up their minds. The decisions had already been made for me. I was no longer seen as the woman who raised them, the woman who had always been strong and independent. I was just another elderly person to be cared for. I felt my heart sinking, my chest tightening. How could they say this to me? Hadn't I always done everything for them? Wasn't it me who stayed up late, worried about them when they were sick, or when they had their first heartaches, or when they needed someone to lean on? How could they think I was incapable of managing my own life? For days after that conversation, I tried to reason with them, but it felt like I was talking to walls. They both started calling more often, suggesting places for me to move. They even brought brochures from different assisted living communities, but I never looked at them. I was too angry, too hurt. But as I sat in my living room that night, looking out the window at the stars above, I realized something that would change the course of everything. I didn't have to accept this. I didn't have to let them decide for me. They didn't know me. They didn't know my strength, the woman I had always been. The next morning, I packed my bags. I didn't leave a note. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't explain myself to anyone. I just left. And as I drove out of town, I didn't know where I was going, but I knew one thing for sure. I was free. Next. As I drove away from the only town I had ever known, a strange sense of freedom washed over me, but it was quickly replaced with uncertainty. I didn't have a plan. All I knew was that I couldn't stay in that house, under those circumstances, any longer. The road stretched out before me, and for the first time in years, I was the one making the decisions. I wasn't sure where I was heading, but I felt a sense of relief. I needed space. I needed time to think. I drove for hours, with nothing but the hum of the engine and the occasional radio station playing in the background. I didn't even know where I was going, just that I was escaping. I passed through small towns, big cities, and open highways, but my mind kept returning to that conversation with my children. The words Emma had said kept echoing in my ears. "You're too old to take care of yourself." It felt like a verdict, like they had decided my worth, and that hurt more than I could express. But as the miles passed, something shifted. I began to question my decision. Was I wrong to leave? Should I have fought harder for my independence? Had I done the right thing? My heart ached for my children. They were my flesh and blood. I had raised them, loved them, and yet it felt like they no longer saw me as the strong woman I had always been. I wasn't ready to accept that, but I couldn't go back. I had made my choice. After a few days on the road, I found myself in a quiet town in northern Alabama, a place called Redstone. It was a small town just like the one I had left behind, but something about it felt different. It wasn't too busy, and it had that peaceful small-town charm I'd always loved. I decided to stop, to take a moment to breathe. I checked into a small inn just for a night or two, to clear my head. Sitting at a diner that evening, I looked out the window and watched the people go by. Young couples, old men chatting on the porch, kids running across the street with ice cream cones. I realized something. Life didn't stop when you got older. People here were living, just like they had when they were younger, with the same joy, the same struggles, the same purpose. And yet, somehow, I had allowed myself to be swept away in the tide of other people's opinions about me. I had forgotten who I was. That night, as I walked back to the inn, I passed by a small park. There was a bench under an old oak tree, and as I sat down, a woman approached. She was around my age, maybe a little older. She smiled at me and asked if I minded if she sat down. Her name was Ruth, and she had the kind of warm presence that made you feel at ease. We talked for hours, sharing stories of our lives, our joys, our heartaches, and everything in between. I learned that Ruth had lost her husband just a few years ago, and her children had been encouraging her to move to a senior living facility too. But Ruth wasn't ready. She said that she still had things she wanted to do, places she wanted to see, and dreams she wanted to pursue. She wasn't ready to give up her independence. Talking to Ruth that night gave me a sense of clarity I hadn't expected. I wasn't alone in feeling this way. She had experienced the same rejection, the same desire to remain independent, but had fought back against the idea of being put away somewhere just because of her age. As Ruth shared her story, I realized that I had to do the same. I had to fight for my life, my choices, my independence. Maybe my children didn't understand, but that didn't mean I had to let their view of me dictate my life. I wasn't ready to give up on myself just because I was getting older. The next morning, I sat down at a small cafe, sipping coffee as I made plans. Ruth had given me the push I needed. I wasn't going to just drift through life anymore, taking what was handed to me. I was going to take control. I didn't know what my future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let age or my children's opinions define me. The road ahead was still uncertain, but I had a renewed sense of purpose. I wasn't done yet. I had a lot of life left to live. But just as I was ready to leave Redstone and make my next move, I received a call. It was Emma. She wanted to know where I was. She said she was worried. And that's when I realized the journey I had begun wasn't just about finding freedom. It was about reclaiming the relationship I had with my children. But I wasn't sure if they could ever see me as the strong, independent woman I had always been. And the question that lingered was, could I ever go back to the family I had left behind, or had I truly crossed a line from which I could never return? This section deepens the protagonist's internal struggle and highlights a key turning point, her realization of the need to fight for her independence. Ruth's encounter serves as a catalyst for her to redefine her life and her sense of purpose. I stared at the phone, hesitating. It was Emma's name flashing on the screen, and for a moment, I wondered if I should just ignore it. After all, I had left without a word for a reason. I didn't want to go back to that place, that feeling of being a burden. But then I thought of my grandchildren, the holidays we used to share, the laughter that used to fill our house. My heart wavered. Maybe it was time to face the music. I answered the call. Helen, where are you? We've been worried sick. Emma's voice was shaky, almost pleading. I could tell she was holding back tears.
I'm okay, Emma.
I just needed some time, I replied, trying to sound calm, though I was anything but. Some time? Mom, you left without saying anything. We didn't know if something happened to you. Her voice cracked. I paused, feeling the weight of her concern. It was hard to ignore the guilt creeping in. But I also knew something now that I hadn't before. I couldn't keep living my life to make others happy. I had to find balance between my independence and my love for them. But how? How could I make them understand? Emma insisted that I come back. She said Jake would be there too, and we could sit down and talk. Part of me wanted to go back to them. Part of me just wanted to be with my family again, to find some sort of peace. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was giving up on something I'd fought for my entire life, my independence. It wasn't just about the house or my things, it was about my dignity. I agreed to return, though I knew it wouldn't be easy. I couldn't just walk back into my old life and pretend nothing had happened. There was so much I needed to say, so much that had been left unsaid. When I walked through the front door of my house again, it felt different. The air felt heavy with unspoken words. Emma and Jake were sitting in the living room, waiting for me. They both stood when I entered. Emma's face was full of concern, but there was something else there too, guilt. Jake looked uncomfortable, avoiding my gaze. "Mom, we're glad you're okay," Emma said softly, her voice filled with regret. "We were just worried. We didn't mean to push you away." Jake nodded in agreement. "Yeah, we just thought it was the best thing for you. You need help, Mom. We just want you to be safe." I sat down slowly, feeling the weight of the moment. I couldn't sugarcoat it anymore. "You think I need help? You think I'm too old to care for myself?" I asked, my voice thick with emotion. Emma looked at me, her eyes wide.
No, Mom.
"It's not that. We just don't want you to be alone. We don't want you to get hurt. We love you." And that's when I realized something. They didn't see me as the woman I had been all my life. They didn't see the strength I had carried all these years. They didn't see me as their mother, the woman who had raised them, who had always been there for them. They saw me as someone fragile, someone who needed protecting. They were worried about me, but in their worry, they had taken away my agency, my voice. It hurt, but I understood. They loved me, but they didn't trust me anymore. They had lost faith in my ability to care for myself. I took a deep breath. It was time to say what I had been holding in for so long. I've spent my life taking care of everyone, raising you both, loving your father, being there for you. And now, when I'm older, I'm supposed to just sit back and let you decide what's best for me? I don't need you to protect me. I need you to trust me. I'm still the same person. I can take care of myself. The room was silent. I could see the conflict in their eyes, the fear, the love, and the guilt all tangled together. I stood up slowly, my voice growing stronger. "I'm not going back to a facility. I won't be caged. If you want me to be part of your lives, you'll have to accept that. But I need you to understand that I'm still capable. I need you to trust that I know what's best for me. I'm not ready to give up my independence. Not yet." Emma looked at me, her face softened. "We just wanted to help, Mom. We didn't mean to make you feel like you weren't capable." "I know," I said, my voice softening. "But I've lived my life on my terms, and I'm not about to stop now. We need to figure out how to navigate this together." Jake spoke up then, his voice quieter. "We just didn't want you to get hurt, Mom. I think maybe we need to find a middle ground." And that's when I knew things could change. It wasn't going to be easy, but it didn't have to be a battle. We could find a way to rebuild our relationship, to respect each other's independence. The road ahead wouldn't be simple, but it was mine to walk. As I walked out of the room, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in months. Maybe the journey had just begun, but for the first time in a long while, I wasn't afraid to face it. I thought that was the hardest part. But when I received a letter from the assisted living facility they'd been looking at, asking me to come for a tour, I knew that the real challenge was just beginning. Could I truly regain their trust? Would I be able to prove that I could still take care of myself? Or would they continue to see me as someone who needed help? The days following that conversation felt strangely lighter, yet heavier in a way. The tension between me and my children had shifted. There was still a lot of unspoken emotion hanging in the air, but there was a sense of understanding, too. They were trying to respect my wishes, even though I could tell they were still unsure. I didn't blame them. I had left without explanation, and now I was trying to rebuild what we had lost. It wouldn't be easy, but at least now they were trying. I continued to stay in Redstone, figuring out what my next move would be. The world outside felt new, different, like a blank canvas waiting for me to paint my next chapter. And I realized something important during these quiet days. This was my life now. I had spent so many years living for others, worrying about everyone else, but now I had the chance to live for me. It was both terrifying and exhilarating. One evening, while sitting in the small-town cafe where I had first met Ruth, I reflected on how far I had come. I had learned that independence wasn't just about being physically capable of taking care of yourself. It was about being able to make decisions that aligned with who you were, despite what others might think. It was about having the strength to say no when needed and to stand firm in your convictions. I wasn't just an older woman trying to prove something. I was still the person I had always been, and I deserved the same respect I had always given to others. I had spoken to Ruth on the phone a few times since our meeting, and she had become a kind of mentor to me. Ruth had made a life for herself after her husband passed away, traveling, experiencing new things, and never allowing age to define her. It wasn't about running away from the past, it was about embracing what was ahead. Ruth's words stayed with me. Don't let anyone tell you when your story is over. You write the ending, Helen. No one else. A few weeks later, I received a message from Emma. It was simple, but the words made my heart race. Can we talk? I had been expecting it, but part of me was still nervous. I had made my stand, but was it too much for her to accept? Would this be the beginning of healing, or the end of our relationship? We agreed to meet at the same cafe in Redstone. I arrived early, not sure what to expect. When Emma walked through the door, her face was a mix of uncertainty and hope. She sat down across from me, and for the first time in a long while, we didn't immediately jump into the heavy conversation. We talked about the weather, about small things, things we used to talk about when we weren't afraid of what the other person thought. It felt strange, but it also felt like the beginning of something. Mom, I'm sorry, Emma said, after a long pause. I never meant to make you feel like you weren't capable. I thought I was doing what was best for you. I see now that I was wrong. I never wanted to take away your independence. I've been scared. Scared that you'd get hurt or that something would happen to you. I was just trying to protect you. Her words hit me harder than I expected. I realized that all this time, she hadn't been trying to control me. She had been acting out of fear. It wasn't an excuse for her actions, but it helped me understand her side. I know, Emma, I replied. And I'm not angry anymore. I just need you to understand that I'm still the same woman who raised you. I'm still capable. I don't want to be put in a box just because of my age. I'm not asking for your permission. I'm asking for your respect. We sat in silence for a moment, both of us processing what had been said. I could see the relief in Emma's eyes, the realization that maybe, just maybe, she had been wrong, but she was willing to listen and understand. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever is, but it was progress. After that conversation, things began to slowly change. Emma called more often, not just to check on me, but to talk about our memories, our shared history, and to ask how I was doing. Jake, too, started to reach out more. The walls between us were crumbling, one brick at a time, and it felt like the foundation we had built together as a family was beginning to stand again. It wasn't easy, but we were working at it. A few months later, I made the decision to visit Emma and Jake. I went back to the house, but this time, I didn't feel like an outsider. I didn't feel like I was giving in or compromising myself. I was going back as an equal, as someone who was still capable, still strong. I had made my peace with the fact that things would never be the same as they once were, but that didn't mean they couldn't be good again. We sat down together as a family and had dinner. It wasn't anything extravagant. It was just a simple meal, but it felt like a victory. A small step forward. I realized then that I didn't need to be defined by my age or anyone's expectations of me. I had a choice in how I lived, and that choice didn't stop just because the years were adding up. My life was mine to live, and no matter how many times I was told that I was too old, too fragile, or too much of a burden, I knew I would always have the strength to keep going. As I sat there with my children, my grandchildren laughing in the background, I felt a sense of peace. This was a new chapter for all of us. But the journey wasn't over. I still had so many things I wanted to do, so many places I wanted to go, and so much life left to live. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid to face whatever came next. But just as I was beginning to feel at ease, I received another call. This time it was from Ruth. She had some news that would change my perspective on everything yet again. I couldn't wait to hear what she had to say, but something told me that this new chapter wasn't going to be as simple as it seemed. The call from Ruth changed everything. She had been toying with the idea of traveling to Italy for a few months now, but she had just found out about a unique art class in Florence, designed specifically for older adults. It was an opportunity to explore creativity, reconnect with yourself, and immerse in a completely new culture. Ruth, in her wisdom, had already signed up for the class and wanted me to come with her. At first, I hesitated. Italy?
Me?
I was too old, wasn't I? But then, the more I thought about it, the more it felt like the right move. I had spent so many years staying in my comfort zone, raising my children, maintaining the same routine, never stepping outside the life I had always known. But now I realized I had the chance to break free. I could be someone new, experience a new chapter. I had already done the hardest part, fighting for my independence, and now I could embrace a new kind of freedom. I called Emma and Jake that evening. I told them about Ruth's offer and my decision. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line, and then Emma spoke. "Mom, you're really going?" she asked, surprised. "I thought you'd want to stay close to home." "I need to do this, Emma," I replied, my voice firm. "I've spent my life making decisions based on everyone else's needs. Now it's time to think about what I want. I want to live fully, and this feels like the next step." Emma and Jake were supportive, but there was an undertone of concern, which I understood. They had never seen me as someone who would just pick up and leave again. It was as if they still saw me as fragile, but I wasn't that person anymore. I was the woman who had taken control of her life, the woman who refused to let age define her. And this trip, this new chapter, was my way of proving that to myself and to them. "I guess I can't stop you, can I?" Emma said with a laugh, her voice filled with both pride and a bit of fear. "No, you can't," I said, smiling. "But I'll always come back, no matter where I go." A few weeks later, I was on a plane to Florence. As the airplane ascended into the sky, I looked out of the window at the clouds below. For the first time in years, I felt truly alive. I didn't know what the future would bring, but I was ready to embrace it. I had no plans to stop living, no matter how old I got. When I arrived in Italy, it was everything I had imagined, and more. The cobblestone streets, the vibrant culture, the food, the history. It was a dream come true. I spent my days in the art class with Ruth, painting, creating, and learning. The joy of creating something from nothing reminded me of the joy I had once felt in raising my children, in shaping their lives. But now, I was creating for me, something I hadn't done in so long. As I walked through the streets of Florence one evening, the sun setting over the Arno River, I reflected on how far I had come. From the painful moment of leaving my home to the realization that I could still live my life on my terms, everything had changed. I had learned to embrace uncertainty, to take risks, and to trust in myself again. Ruth and I spent hours discussing life, art, love, and everything in between. She had become more than just a mentor. She had become a reminder that life wasn't over just because the years were adding up. It was never too late to start over. It was never too late to do something for yourself. I still kept in touch with Emma and Jake, sending them postcards from Florence and telling them about my adventures. I had learned to let go, not just of my house and my past, but of the need for their constant approval. Our relationship had changed, but in a way that felt healthier. They were beginning to understand that I could still be their mother, still be strong, still be independent, while also living my own life. One day, Emma called to tell me that she and Jake had been discussing things, and they wanted to visit me in Italy. I smiled. They were finally starting to see me as the woman I had always been, the woman who could make her own decisions, who could take control of her own destiny. Eventually, the time came for me to return home. I had learned so much about myself during my time in Florence. about my strength, my resilience, and my ability to live fully, even in my later years. But I wasn't finished. There was still so much more to explore, so much more to do. When I got back to Redstone, I felt different. I wasn't the woman who had left in search of freedom. I was someone who had found it. My children welcomed me back with open arms, but I didn't feel like I was returning to the same place. I had grown, and so had they. Our relationship had transformed into something more equal, more respectful. Looking back, I realized that leaving was the best decision I ever made. It wasn't just about escaping the confines of my home or my children's expectations. It was about finding myself again, proving to myself that I could still be the woman I once was, and even more than that, I could be someone new. Someone stronger, more independent, and more capable than I had ever believed. As I stand here today, I know that life is not defined by age. It's defined by the choices we make, the courage we find, and the love we give and receive. I may have left, but I came back stronger. And now, I'm ready for whatever comes next. Because my story is far from over. In the end, the journey wasn't just about independence. It was about finding balance between the past and the future, between what we owe to others and what we owe to ourselves. And as I look toward the future, I know that the best is yet to come.